My name is Mutari Priksapong from the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. I'm very delighted to be welcoming you to this webinar series presented to you by the Making City Resilient 2030 or MCR 2030. We have today with us our dear partner C40s who will be sharing with us about the climate action planning and finance. And we'll be talking about the tools and resources available by C40 for the cities. The session today will be running for 90 minutes. And we will be using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen for the questions. You can put the question that you have for the speakers there. And we also have the Arabic and French interpretation available for this session if you click the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Sanjay Bhatia, Head of the Global Education and Training Institutes, to give us a very warm welcome remarks.
Thank you, Mai, and welcome to all the participants and the speakers from C40. As Mai already mentioned, this is a series under the MCR 2030 Making Cities Resilient initiative, of which C40 is a core partner, founding member. Some of you may know the Making Cities Resilient campaign, which existed before the MCR 2030 for the last 10 years. And based on that experience, the partners and the cities got together to launch this new initiative called Making Cities Resilient 2030. What the MCR 2030 aims to do is to help cities achieve sustainable development by providing the access to tools, resources, technical support that can help to reduce disaster risk, climate risk, and help to integrate resilience into the local development planning processes. The MCR 2030 will run for the next 10 years. And in this series, what we are trying to do is showcase the services and the tools that are offered by the partners. So with this, a few remarks, I will now hand over to Mai, as I know all of you are very keen to hear this, the C40. Over. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sanjaya. And with this, I would also like to invite our dear colleague, Ilona Ryan, Team Coordinator of the North America and the International Diplomacy at C40 City Climate Leadership Group, to further introduce to us the rest of the sessions and the speakers for today. Over to you, Ilona.
Thank you, Mai. Hello, everyone. So we have 3 presentations today. Our first presenter is Ms. Chantal Artkarpool. She's the Head of Adaptation Planning at C40. And through the Climate Adaptation Academy, Chantal supports our C40 member cities in developing and implementing their plans to build climate resilience and adapting to climate risks. She will present on steps, tools, and resources for adaptation planning in cities. Our second presentation will be an overview of our city's finance facility by Ms. Jessie Apavu and Mr. Lion Villacorta. Jessie serves as the C40 Cities Finance Facility's Regional Engagement Manager for Africa. She works across African cities in the CFF network to facilitate engagement with a wide range of stakeholders. Mr. Lion Villacorta is the Regional Manager for Asia, Regional Engagement Manager for Asia, my apologies, and he supports the knowledge sharing and partnerships of the C40 Cities Finance Facility. In this role, he works closely with cities to develop products highlighting unique insights and knowledge generated from the CFF interventions. And lastly, we're pleased to have a city presentation, the C40 member city. Dr. Sean O'Donoghue is the Senior Manager for the Climate Protection Branch in the Environmental Planning and Climate Protection Department of the eThekwini Municipality, or Durban. And Dr. O'Donoghue will be presenting on Durban's resilience initiatives. So we'll kick it off with Chantal. And over to you, Chantal.
Thanks, Ilona, and thanks everyone for joining. It's so lovely to see that you're joining from so many different countries around the globe. Myself, I'm based in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, hence this picture. As you may or may not know, Rotterdam is mostly located under sea level. So I had to put a lot of effort in staying well protected. Next slide, please. So in my presentation, I will focus on two items. The first one being C40's climate action planning framework. And the second one is a sort of top 5 of available tools and resources. And at the end, there will be 10 minutes or so for question and answers. So next slide, please. So first, I'll say something about CAP's, the C40's climate action planning framework. Next slide. So, as you probably know, the Paris Agreement is very famous for this global objective of keeping global warming well below 2 degrees, ideally to 1.5 degrees. But what a lot of people are less aware of is that there's also, for the first time, a sort of adaptation component in this plan. This is really about enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening resilience, and reducing vulnerability. And so many cities ask C40, like, if we want to contribute to the Paris goals, the Paris Agreement goals, then what should my climate action plan look like? Next slide, please. So just to be clear, if you want to make a climate action plan with strong adaptation components, it doesn't have to be one plan. It could be an integrated plan that serves carbon reduction goals and adaptation goals. It could also be an annex to existing plans, because a lot of cities already have a lot of resilience plans or greening, housing plans. So you can also add an adaptation layer to it in an annex. There could be separate plans. It could also be downscaled from national plans, or there could be a sort of overarching strategy with sectoral plans underneath. So there is no blueprint or whatsoever, just to be clear on that. But next slide, please. Together with C40 member cities from around the globe, we have sort of tried to understand what is realistic and what is feasible to put in a climate action plan that meets the requirements of the Paris Agreement. Next slide, please. And so what we all, C40 and those pilot cities, agreed on, that a good climate action plan or a set of plans will, first of all, develop a pathway to deliver an emissions neutral city by 2050 at the latest. But secondly, and I think most important for this audience, because this is about resilience and adaptation, is that this climate action plan should also demonstrate how the city will adapt and improve its resilience to climate hazards that may impact the city now, but also in the future under different climate change scenarios. And thirdly, we think that it's very important to also look into the social, environmental, and economic benefits from implementing the plan, to make sure that those benefits are equally and equitably distributed over the city's population. So it's not certain groups of people that benefit from the resilience measures, but it's a citywide accomplishment and achievement. And fourth, a strong plan also provides more details on the city's governance, who's doing what, who has which power, which partners will we be relying on, and we need to collaborate with. So who do we need to really implement this plan once it's completed? Next slide, please. And so the sort of mechanism to do this is to consider adaptation and mitigation in an integrated way. I think in many countries and cities around the globe, there's still quite separate domains, siloed. There's a mitigation team working on reduction of carbon emissions, and there's an adaptation team improving climate resilience. But there's a lot of interconnections between the two domains, and a lot of opportunities also to combine the two. I'll explain a bit more about that later. So this integration is very important. But we also feel that it's very important to have a strong evidence base to really understand your city and base your actions on the information and on the data you have about your own city, which makes it fundamental and makes your plan more successful. And then thirdly, we also think it's very important to have a transparent process to monitor the delivery and to also communicate progress towards your communities, towards your council, your political leadership, to demonstrate where you stand, what still needs to be done, but also to demonstrate success. Next slide, please. So how to develop such an integrated, equitable and resilient plan. This is the process that we've come up with, and I just need to be clear up front, this is a simplified process. It doesn't show that in reality there's a lot of feedback loops, a lot of parallel tracks. For example, in Rotterdam, we started implementing no regret measures in places that we knew we had a problem. And in parallel, we were still doing research on our data, our evidence base, where we were still fine-tuning our climate risk assessment. So there are parallel tracks and feedback loops, but just to sort of simplify this process, if you want to embark on this climate action planning process, it is very important on the left in the red column to get mayoral commitment, to get the political leadership on board, to establish a core team, and to also do what we call a strategic appraisal, which is basically a baseline study, understanding what plans and policies do we already have in place, what's already being done, and what else needs to be done then. So that's really sort of getting started, setting the ground for the next stage, which is in yellow, building the evidence base. This is an integrated chart, by the way, for adaptation and mitigation. But for adaptation, it is very important to make sure you've got the best possible climate risk assessment, that you have the best possible information about current and future climate risk to your city. And once you've got that, you can then turn into the blue-greenish stage of setting a vision. Where do I want to be with my city in terms of resilience? Try to understand, what could be feasible and realistic targets. And if those are my targets, what would be the best suitable actions to do that, to screen them for inclusivity, but also for potential mitigation clashes or opportunities. And then to define that further, to detail your action, like who's going to do it, when will you do it, how much would it cost, where would I get the money from? And once you have all those pieces of information, you can then, in green, draft your plan, write your plan, including the monitoring information and the governance system. And throughout this process, there's a continuous stakeholder and community engagement, which is crucial to do it continuously, and governance to keep all the departments and crucial actors on board, to make sure that your plan is realistic, but also that there's a lot of commitment in the implementation stage. Next slide, please. Now, this is just a sort of another simplified graph, just showing that after the climate action planning stage, there is still, of course, a very crucial stage of implementation, mainstreaming, monitoring, and evaluation. And again, this too is a simplified chart. There are constant feedback loops, just to show the next steps after the plan. Next slide, please. So I'll now present you my top 5 favorite tools and resources. Over the past couple of years, C40 has developed hundreds of resources, and we're currently in the process of making them available online. Quite a few are already online in different languages, but it's a continuous process. But today we don't have the time to go through all of them, so I've picked my top 5. So next slide, please. The first resources, and you may remember the color code, so climate change risk assessment. I put a yellow bar because it's the evidence base in the rainbow chart. For this, we have 3 crucial resources. I think the first one is a climate change risk assessment guidance document, which is basically describing the key components of a climate change risk assessment. It distinguishes between essential elements, which we think are sort of crucial information to be able to take the first step in adaptation planning. But it also describes what we call best practice or recommended items that allow for an even better informed decision making. And several cities use this guidance document already as a terms of reference when they've got external funding from international agencies or national agencies. They use this as a term of reference, handed it over to the consultant, and then the consultant followed this guidance perfectly, leading to a very useful risk assessment. The document you see on the left is a screenshot. It's what we call the Ccra screening sheet. It's perfectly in line with the guidance document. It's just a sort of tool, Excel sheet that you can do to tick the boxes, to do a self-assessment. You could also do this before inviting the consultants to do the work, but basically it's a gap analysis. Say, oh, this information, yes, we've got it. It's in this document, page number 23. And this information we have limited, or we don't have it at all. And so basically the sheet on the left will turn into a gap analysis that you can also use for fundraising. And we've seen this in some of our cities, that once you've done this gap analysis, it's much easier to get external funding, because it is so clear that you've done your homework and you know what the gaps are. So I think this is a very important sheet to start with if you don't have much information on climate risk in your city. Next slide, please. Then we also have 2 reports on interdependencies. The first report helps a city understand the interdependencies in a city, the cascading effect. So for example, if there's extreme rain and your power supply fails, then how does that affect your medical services, your communication services, your food distribution, your water supply, etc. So it's a methodology that helps you understand and look beyond those primary consequences of an extreme weather event. The other document, Understanding Infrastructure Interdependencies, is very much around understanding the barriers to overcome those interdependencies. It has case studies on how cities are overcoming these barriers and recommendations for you to do the same. So the first report is more a technical analysis, and the second report is helping you understand how to overcome those barriers. Next slide, please. And then the third resource we have on risk assessment is what we call the rapid risk assessment methodology. It's a module that helps a city do a climate risk assessment themselves if there is no funding available within the city or outside the city. So it's a methodology partly consisting of a desktop study, pointing you to the direction of where are the global resources, where can you find your information, how would you then apply that to your city. And it also contains workshop methodologies to engage your departments in your city and also external stakeholders to validate your findings. And 3 of our cities have tested this methodology very successfully, I would say. They managed to harvest a lot of information that was valuable input for their adaptation plan. And what I've been told is that you can actually do this, well, within a couple of weeks. Of course, if you want to strengthen your stakeholder engagement, you take a little bit more time, but it is actually quite an easy way to collect the maximum number of data on your city. Next slide, please. Another tool I wanted to highlight is what we call the Adaptation and Mitigation Interactions Assessment Tool. It's a very long name, but this is really about understanding the opportunities of thinking of adaptation and mitigation in an integrated way. Potentially, you can take synergetic measures that both reduce carbon emissions and increase your climate resilience, or you can find piggybacking opportunities if there's a mitigation project going on in your city, and with a small extra cost, or sometimes even no extra cost, you can add an adaptation layer to it, which provides a lot of opportunities to accelerate your adaptation actions. And on the other hand, in yellow, this tool, this methodology also allows you to flag potential clashes between mitigation and adaptation, helping you to understand if some mitigation actions are perhaps a malinvestment, if they're not designed in a resilient way. And potentially there's also trade-offs. If you have a heat wave, you know, from an adaptation perspective, you may want to use aircon to cool homes and hospitals. From a mitigation perspective, it increases your carbon emissions. And at the same time, this tool will help you then sort of make the trade-off, but also understand what is perhaps the best way to deal with this trade-off. And that could potentially be, you know, connecting those aircons to solar panels to at least reduce the urban heat island effect, but also reduce the emissions. Next slide, please. And this is the last tool or resource that I would like to share with you. It's on monitoring and evaluation. A lot of our cities asked us, how on earth can we measure our progress in adaptation. We've been planting trees, we've been adding parks, but how do we know whether we are approaching our goals and targets in terms of resilience, and how far are we? How do we communicate this? And a lot of cities were struggling with this. So we've developed this very helpful methodology again for cities to identify indicators to measure their progress, whether you have little data in your city or a lot of data. There's a lot of choices to make there, but this methodology works for all cases, I would say. And this methodology would also help you set targets. So once you understand how you can measure, it's also easier to set targets on adaptation. Next slide, please. So I can imagine this was quite high level and overwhelming. There are many more resources available at C40 Knowledge Hub, accessible to all of you. And like I said, in the next month, many more resources will be translated and uploaded. So I recommend signing up to the newsletter so that you get notifications when new resources are released. So yeah, good luck browsing the Knowledge Hub. And this is the end of my presentation. I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chantal. And there are a few questions here. So, but just building up firstly on the point that you said about the Knowledge Hub. So all these tools that you mentioned and the guidance and the frameworks will be available on the Knowledge Hub, even for cities who are not members of C40?
Yes, the Knowledge Hub is an open platform, so everyone around the globe can access these tools and resources.
No, thank you. So there, one question about, there was one point on the future projections when the city does the risk assessment. So future projections. So one is the historical data on climate in the impacts on the city, but the future projection. So any good tools available or methodologies that you would know of, or would this come later today's discussion, that cities could tap for the future projections? Because for the future projections at the local level, sometimes it gets a bit difficult.
Yes, no, I totally understand. A lot of cities around the globe are struggling accessing those data. I would have to look it up. We have this rapid risk assessment methodology. I can look it up and put it in the Q&A box later for more details. But yes, there are definitely a lot of open resources available that few people are aware of, but they're free, open and free data to access. So there's much more out there. I'll put some more information in the chat box because it might be a bit too detailed. But yeah, there's definitely more out there than many of us know.
Okay, thank you. And then there is a question, is there a ranking of cities as well by C40 based on the indicators you just mentioned? Yeah,
it's a good question and it's a tricky one. The quick answer is no, there is no ranking, and I don't think C40 wishes to make a rank and say, oh, city number X is the most resilient city around the globe. It is actually impossible to compare cities. There are no generic indicators that give a number. Carbon emissions are much easier to compare, right? But for adaptation, it's not possible. And we notice even if you look at urban heat islands effects, for example, there are so many ways to measure it. You can measure it with satellite, you can measure it with sensors, you can measure it at ground level or 1 meter thermal comfort. And so all those cities are measuring their progress in a very different way. Many attempts have been made to sort of standardize those indicators and numbers, but in reality, so far it turns not to be possible. So when we develop this framework, this monitoring framework, it's really supposed to serve the city for themselves to understand, am I improving my resilience or not? So it's not meant to compare with other cities. It is for your own city to compare with your own baseline.
Okay, so then I'll give you two more questions. One is, do these tools also integrate the needs of persons with disabilities in the assessments, the gap analysis, and so on? And the second tool, do they also integrate the use of technology especially, for example, geospatial technology, which could help the cities adapt?
Right. So really good questions. On the disabilities, I didn't have the time to go into this, but we've got an enormous suite of resources on what we call inclusive climate action. And this is very much focused at understanding the different communities you have in your city, the poor, the elderly, but also disabled people. So this is really about helping you understand for your own city, what are my vulnerable groups, and to take those into account. So the tools we provide are more of a checklist to make you think about those groups. We don't have additional information to help you identify those numbers. It's more of a checklist. On technology, our tools are very much aimed at cities getting the maximum information for themselves. How they process that, if they do that in GIS or any other platform, it's up to the city. So we don't provide GIS platforms, for example. But again, I think there are open sources again to create your own GIS system. So yeah, for all those tools and resources, we're pointing you in directions, but in the end, you would have to do it yourself and build your own technological platform.
Thanks. So last question, and then there are a few more in the Q&A, which you can look at later. So in this guidance and the tools, is there any guidance for low resource environments, meaning low resourced cities, for example? So how can the city use the tool within the capacity it has or within the resources it has?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think all C40 tools are designed in such a way they're designed with cities, with a lot of global south cities, low capacity cities. So we already put a lot of effort in making this easy for everyone and making this intuitive. We've got lots of, even for one resource, we often have like 5 sub-resources explaining what's behind it. So I would say all those resources are suitable. They're particularly aimed at cities that are low resourced. I think the high resource cities, they would just hire a consultant and have them do the work. But a lot of those tools are do-it-yourself tools, how we call it.
Okay, thank you, Chantal. We have more than 240 participants today, so that's quite good. So, so with that, I hand over to Ilona. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanja. And we now move on to our second presentation, an overview of our city's finance facility by my colleagues Jessie and Layan. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Ilona. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues from around the globe. It's great to have representation from so many countries here today. And I would just like to use this opportunity to thank the UNDRR team and the MCR2030 for making this happen. And also a warm welcome to all the colleagues on the line today. So this is today it's a conversation between my colleague Lion Villacorta and I. We won't be using a lot of slides. We've just got a couple. But just as a backdrop to this session, I would like to highlight 3 points before we start answering the question on how to finance adaptation projects. Number 1 is to highlight the ever-growing importance of building resilience to future climate shocks and stresses. And more so than ever, there is a need for cities to deliver climate resilience at an accelerated pace to increase the resilience of communities that have been made more vulnerable to future climate shocks by the COVID-19 pandemic. Number 2 that I would like to highlight is that there is no silver bullet to developing and financing adaptation and resilience projects. They remain very context specific. The nature of the adaptation projects dictates a lot about the approach that can be used. Adaptation in itself is quite a vast topic, and it also depends on the community and the prevailing policy environment. However, what we will try to do today is to draw parallels from the projects that the C40 Cities Finance Facility, the CFF, has been supporting to answer the overarching question of today's webinar. Number 3 is, out of the suite of possibilities to develop adaptation projects, one of them being what Chantal has just presented on around the climate action plans, the Paris compliant climate action plans. There's also project preparation is a very important step to build the technical and the financial aspect of adaptation projects. So that could be technical studies, business models, or financial models, to allow an entity, to allow a city in this case, to mobilize finance and accelerate the shift of financial flows towards these much needed interventions. And finance flows to cities need to increase significantly to fast track a climate resilient future for all. So I would like to turn to my colleague Lion Villacorta, who is currently serving as the Regional Engagement Manager for Asia for the C40 Cities Finance Facility. And the CFF is a project preparation facility. And Lion, it would be great if you could tell us what are project preparation facilities, what do they do, and how does the CFF support cities?
Definitely. Thank you very much, Jessie, and good day to everyone. We do have a very full house. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. So for me, let me just share some visual aid that I've prepared so that we could have a more easy discussion. So for me, really looking at a project cycle first is a really good place to start in understanding what project preparation facilities are and what they do. Our diagram here is actually a very simplified representation of the steps and stages in preparing an infrastructure-related climate change project. There are certainly different project cycles specific to their themes, containing very detailed and more specialized stages. But for our discussion, we'll keep it to the simplified one. So with that, in general, project preparation facilities are really means of support to advance project concepts and ideas along these stages, sometimes all the way to being bankable, or what we refer to as finance-ready state. So PPFs, or project preparation facilities, achieve this through a range of activities. Often they include technical, environmental, and social studies, very importantly. They often define where the support starts and ends along the project cycle. And as you can see here, the CFF provide support as early as the scoping stage and work towards all the way to financial readiness, including linking our partner cities with financial institutions. So definitely for us, the CFF focuses on partner cities, and we target linking them to the financial institutions. So more detailed into the CFF, we typically support cities in preparing business case developments, financial structuring, financial options analysis after we have done all of the heavy lifting with the technical and other feasibility studies, including gender LNOB and other social considerations. What is unique with CFF and how we support cities with other project preparation facilities is that we mainstream capacity development in our work to enable our partner cities to scale up and apply this particular know-how independently in other cases and other projects they may tackle. So another rather unique feature of CFF is that we integrate knowledge creation, curation, and dissemination onto our core work. So it is inseparable from what we do. We actively share our insights and lessons so that other practitioners beyond our partner cities can benefit from our work. So with this overview for everyone, Jessie, I know that the CFF supported Durban in an exciting adaptation project. Can you share with us the approach that was used to build the business case or the case for this project?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Lion. You did mention the right word. It is a very exciting project that Durban had applied to the CFF. So in response to Durban's successful application to the CFF, the work started in 2018. So at the time, Durban was already implementing a river management project, and that's in response to recurring flood damage to road and stormwater infrastructure in the city. And the application to the CFF was to develop a business case that would allow Durban to upscale the existing project into a city-wide project on improving the overall condition of waterways. And that would be through litter removal, through alien vegetation, through riverbank management as well. And the intended impact was to build flood resilience, limit damage to public and private infrastructure, create jobs, and equally important is to improve the ecosystem services derived from its watercourses. So just to dive a little bit more into the projects before we get into the approach, was that this was a project that was operating at a scale of about 300 kilometers. So over 300 kilometers, the municipality was working on improving the overall functioning of the river so that it could limit flood damage, reduce the flood damage to infrastructure. And the approach that the CFF has used in collaboration with Durban, and I'm very pleased that we've got Dr. Sean O'Donoghue on the line today, who will tell us a little bit more about the project itself, was that we developed a business case. And if you think about it, it's not common to come across a business case for a city-wide adaptation project. So we were looking at all 7,400 kilometers of watercourses in Durban, looking at what it would mean for the city to upscale that program from 300 kilometers to all of its watercourses. So the approach was through a business case to determine what investment the city would need and what would be the avoided damage and losses and what would be the benefits of this particular program. And we have recently completed the citywide business case. So we completed it at the beginning of this year. And just to give you a quick, quick numbers on that. So over the next 20 years, the upscaling of the program will require about $500 million over 20 years and will yield approximately $100 million in avoided damage to culverts. And culverts alone are a very specific type of infrastructure, stormwater and road infrastructure. So this is only to one type of municipal infrastructure that we will be avoiding about $100 million through the implementation of the program across the city. And that's also about 0.8 to 1.6 billion in societal benefits. And the reason there is quite a wide range of 0.8 to 1.6, it's because it depends on the discount rate that you use. I'm not going to go into too much details about it. There will be a short report that will be produced on this to explain the business case that the CFF is putting together. When that becomes available, we're very happy to share it with everyone. And also, there's going to be over 9,000 full-time jobs created. And I want to just really emphasize this, over 9,000 full-time jobs created over the 20 years of implementation. That's really significant. South Africa has been hit very hard by the COVID-19 pandemic with unemployment figures skyrocketing from last year to this year. So this is a program that allows us to build resilience on multiple facets to really bounce back from the COVID-19 pandemic. But also what the business case shows is that there are multiple other benefits for green economy interventions. So that's the approach that we have developed in full collaboration with the Durban municipality.
Thank you very much, Jessie. Those figures are really, really strong, and they do make the case. Could you tell us a bit more about what is transformational about business cases in general, or particularly this one?
Absolutely. So the business case offers figures about the tangible impacts of a specific adaptation project. These figures will allow the city to have conversations with financial institutions, be it public or private, on the yield of every dollar invested. So this opens up a whole lot of doors that without these figures, it is very difficult to engage with financial institutions. And often financial institutions cannot put money towards certain projects if they don't have these figures. They won't go through their internal due diligence. So in essence, what this business case does, the approach used, is that it's breaking down the chasm between climate actions and where the pot of money sits. So this project in Durban also features in its very ambitious Paris compliant climate action plan. And it's also when we start packaging these climate actions as finance ready and bankable projects, that's when we will start seeing the shift of financial flows towards much needed climate resilient urban infrastructure. And I've said this many times, and I'd like to say it again today. It's not the lack of bankable projects. It's not the lack of finance that is hindering the shift of financial flows. It's the lack of bankable projects. And that's where a lot of the effort needs to be going towards packaging these climate actions into bankable projects.
Amazing. This is really informative and very good tips, Jessie. I understand CFF also supported the city of Dakar. Could you make some contrasts and comparisons of how this approach differs from the one we used in Dakar?
Yes, absolutely. So Dakar is the capital of Senegal in West Africa, and the approach we used there was a little bit different to the approach we've used in Durban. And that's because the CFF is responsive and adapts its approach based on the nature of the project. And as I mentioned earlier, adaptation projects vary in size, they vary in the nature itself because it's such a broad topic. So the project in Dakar differed significantly to the one in Durban, even though they were both addressing flood risks. Just the backdrop before I get into the project and the approach was that Dakar also has been facing recurring floods. In the space of about a single decade, up until about 2009, the number of people affected by floods had increased by 5-fold. This is a 5 times increase in the number of people affected by floods in just about 10 years. And at present, it is estimated that about 40% of the population of Dakar, the city, and the peri-urban areas are considered to be highly exposed to floods. And I repeat this, highly exposed to floods. And the CFF has recently published a report on the strategic importance of addressing floods to unlock the socioeconomic potential in Dakar. And I invite everyone on the line to take a peek at the report and to share it within your networks, because it is very important to address flood risks to unlock socioeconomic potential. So the project itself was an existing basin, quite a big one of about 150,000 cubic meters. It was built several years ago to store stormwater runoff. But as a result of pressure elsewhere on a city infrastructure, what happened is that the basin was used to store both stormwater and wastewater. And what would happen during heavy rainy periods is that the basin would overspill and would flood the area of Grand Yoff. So in collaboration again with the city administration, the CFF has assessed the situation, developed several technical studies on how to improve the basin, and that's looking at options to reroute all wastewater to the appropriate reticulation system, but also to turn the basin into a functional space. Right now, it is a problem area within the community of Grand Yoff. So it's looking at options to turn that basin into an infrastructure that blends within the urban fabric. And what I mean by that, it's a space for recreation during the dry months, and it will act as a buffer area during the rainy season. So if you think about it, during the dry months, it's a park that can be used by all for recreational, for meeting spaces, to reduce the urban island effect. And during the heavy rainy season, it would be a park that becomes partly submersible, if I can call it that. So the approach was to look at the challenge in a holistic manner. So not only fixing the wastewater issue, not only fixing the flood challenge issue, but it was to look at it in a way to better integrate the infrastructure itself and its functioning within the overall urban fabric of Grand Yoff, and also meet the needs of the residents. So what I want to really highlight here is that adaptation projects have multiple benefits when planned in an integrated manner using a systems approach. And I invite all participants today in today's webinar to think through the multiple benefits when planning adaptation projects. I think Chantal pointed it out around the interdependency. So I think it's also important to look at that. Each of these benefits has an economic impact. In the case of Dakar, these economic impacts are the creation of recreational space, a meeting space that supports social cohesion, improving the overall quality of life of the residents of Grand Yoff, limiting the proliferation of waterborne diseases. And on top of all of that, it's limiting flood risks during heavy rainfall events. The benefits are multidimensional and carry a significant economic value. And the benefits can be truly transformative in nature. Lion, I'm going to turn it over to you now and just ask you if you could please tell us how these cities are mobilizing the required finance to move into implementation.
Yes, definitely, Jesse. As you've mentioned correctly earlier, so the cities we're helping are using the business case, the technical studies. If I may use Chantal's terminology here, the evidence base that we have gathered, including our analytical findings, really to open up conversations not only with financial institutions, whether they are development banks, or regional, national, or multilateral, but also with their respective national governments, whether they are technical or other support structures within the government. Because ultimately, having these conversations is what we see for cities as one of the better ways in accessing finance. And so without these documentation, this evidence base, this analytical findings, looking into the interdependencies, these conversations are pretty much a shot in the dark, if I may say. It's very difficult to host. It may not be productive at all, and it may only lead to further setbacks in terms of the project. So ultimately, equipped with this required financial and economic rationale, it is really easier for our partner cities to have these conversations towards their financiers. So the CFF's approach and brings this finance world, really both the public and the private sector with our cities into a much closer relation so that we could develop towards and implement the priority adaptation actions.
Great, thank you so much, Lion. I think it's very important points that you've made there. And I just want to ask you, so the CFF has a set of precedent in supporting adaptation projects. So as the CFF move into its third phase of the program, will the CFF continue supporting adaptation projects at the city level?
Absolutely, definitely. So yes, the CFF is accepting adaptation projects. It is our goal to support cities to build their resilience to climate change, absolutely. And we're gladly accepting adaptation project ideas right now. Perhaps one of the key asterisks is that we have already opened what we call our city selection process, essentially our application, which closes very soon, but definitely in terms of program design and the target of CFF as a project preparation facility includes adaptation projects.
Thank you very much.
With this, yes, thank you very much. And I'll hand it back to Mai.
Yes, thank you, Leah. And I'll actually hand over to Sanjaya.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you both, Jesse and Leanne. So there are a few questions, but just to let the participants know that all the details of the Durban and the Dakar project have been posted in the chat. So please download from there. Also, the link to the Knowledge Hub has been posted by the C40 colleagues in the chat. So please have a look at that. And I think from this from the Knowledge Hub, they would be able to, participants would be able to find a lot of information that and the tools that they need. So coming to the questions, one question is about and another question, sorry, which is not directly related to this, but a participant has asked where to contact for Africa. So if any one of you could put it in the chat or in the Q&A, it's in the Q&A, the Africa content, put it in the chat, the contact, so that would be helpful. So as we go into the questions, C40 is a founding member of the MCR 2030, and we expect that the services offered by C40 will be on the website very soon. So the question is the CFF support available only to cities which are members of the C40, or could cities who may not have yet joined the C40, but they are members of the MCR 2030, could they also apply? And if so, what is the application process like?
Lion, do you want to take that question since you've been very involved in city selection process?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question. There are two ways to answer this, and maybe the short answer is yes, there is a specific type of support that CFF allocates or directs towards non-C40 city members. Although in terms of the full-on activities of a project preparation facility, we do work only with C40 members so far in terms of targeting. So our partner cities would be C40 members, but there are a couple of ways where we do enable support with others. One is an approach that we have piloted already in our previous phase called clustering. So what we do here is that if we have a project that is somewhat applicable to multiple cities in the same country, then we will have one the C40 city as our partner city, sort of as a nucleus, if you will, and then some cities would attach to that. And together we call that cluster, and they would receive support practically of the same magnitude. So in this case, a non-C40 member city would be able to benefit largely. Now, the other type is that this entire component that I've mentioned earlier about knowledge curation, creation, and dissemination, we do set up around of multiple formats in almost all formats we can think of that are specifically targeted for other cities, not our partner cities. And so maybe the format will differ, but there is definitely something for everybody, if I could say that.
Okay, thank you, Leon. Another quick question, does C40 support projects in the Oceania? Because there are very limited cities, but there are many towns. And then just following up on what you just said. So how does a city, or if a town is allowed, a town join C40?
Okay. So in this case in Oceania, I need to brush up because I'm not so familiar with our membership in that region. But if in case, of course, you're a C40 member, definitely you should be eligible for support. There are other technicalities, of course, for CFF. One thing that may be on the technical side is that we only cater to ODA eligible recipient countries. And so first the city needs to be there. On the other hand, in terms of supporting towns and even sort of just practitioners. It's more on our knowledge dissemination part. Right now, we call it replication and upscaling, where we embed everything. And in terms of delivery, we call this program knowledge and learning, and it's catered for everybody. And so there's definitely no barrier for our colleagues in Oceania to benefit from this component of CFF.
Sorry. And another question is about the finance facility. How are you working with regional and national bodies in order to link this approach with their strategies and their, for example, their national adaptation plans, the NAPs?
Go for it. Go for it.
No, I was going to pass it to you.
Okay, no problem. I'll take this one. So the CFF responds to, the CFF's work is in response to a city's application to us. So we work through cities largely, but very often we also have to engage with national bodies because of the way infrastructure projects are led in various parts of the world. So there is some engagement, and there is work that is done with national ministries, but not necessarily per se to mainstream this approach into their national adaptation planning processes, because as I mentioned, it's every adaptation project is different, and every adaptation project support needs to be tailored around that. So it's very challenging to structure that support at the policy level. So right now we operate at the project level within specific cities.
Okay, thank you. So I think last two questions. One is about making the business case for the bankable project. So is it comparable with other investment options for the financial institutions? For example, are the economic benefits compelling enough on their own? Or do you see that you have to add the environmental and social benefits also to help in that? That was the first question. And then the second one is, do you also engage with the insurance sector in the adaptation planning and financing, because they are a stakeholder in the flood risk, for example?
So two excellent questions. I'm very happy to take a stab at them. Just to say that it is, I think we need to stop dissociating the economics of projects separate to the environmental and people and societal benefits. They all operate together. There is no benefit that is separate to people. At the end of the day, systems are around people. So I think it's an important distinction to make here. But to say that the Durban project, the internal return rate, I can't remember it off the top of my head right now. But if you look at the links that we provided, I believe you will find the information there. It is a very attractive internal return rate. So the IRR is very positive. It is more than comparable to traditional infrastructure projects. So to say that through the business case, you can build those kind of rationals, but it is not only in the traditional sense around the investment in pure financial term. There are economic benefits that have also been quantified, so societal benefits that have also been quantified in there. And it's important to take a look at the system as a whole, as opposed to segments of that particular system. And in terms of the insurance sector, working with them, yes. So I know that the Durban city administration was liaising with specific insurance providers in South Africa. It is an important thing to be working with them, especially in relation to the damage that is done to private property and what can be done through that. So it is a line of work that is still relatively nascent, but it is the Durban city administration has been liaising with a couple of insurance providers in South Africa.
Sanjaya, if I may just add to this, I'm absolutely on board on what Jesse says. In fact, within CFF, we are already sort of practicing this type of integration and not separating sort of just the economics of the entire intervention from the people. Many of our analytical tools, unfortunately, some of them are rather very case specific, but some of our analytical tools already incorporate public health benefits. So particularly on, let's say, hospitalization rates, and if we can quantify those, and our tools already are able to do this. So a lot of our environmental benefits and our public health side, so on the people side, are already incorporated into the analysis of cost and benefits. And even with this integrated consideration, as Jesse mentioned, we have seen in several cases that even the economic internal rate of return of projects are still comparative with traditional ones. So in fact, we're quite happy to see this in Asia. And so it's definitely doable. We're working towards having some of our modeling tools available and public, but most of them, given the nature of, and complexity, needs fine tuning every time it's used. So definitely we have this comparative competitiveness with other cases.
Thank you. I think then we can, before we move on, just to mention that there are a couple of questions again on how to join C40. So I think maybe if you can share the link in the chat and direct the participants to your website where they can find out how they can join. That would be good. It seems to be generating a lot of interest. So that's good. There is one, okay, I think we have a minute. So would C40 consider use of geoengineering technologies in the future? Use of geoengineering technologies. We may need to use geoengineering in the future. So what do you think of that? Or is it something that the city has to define within their action plan? What kind of technologies they want to use?
Honestly, we haven't come across the case where the question really rose up. So I'll probably defer into providing an opinion to that question. But I see your point, Sanjaya, where it probably is the city that is ultimately able to decide on this matter.
Yeah. Okay, there's a very good last question which I need to ask. In terms of financial sourcing, how would you advise small cities who have inadequate funds to invest for climate change? What advice would you give them?
All right. I think what we've seen so far in our experience is that even in much larger cities, we can always characterize as the fiscal situation being very stretched and under-resourced. And what is important to see here is that there are actually very good indicators and metrics we can use so that we are able to decide in a very informed manner that in the places where we spend money is the best place to spend money. And definitely analysis, feasibility studies will provide this, but at the same time, good studies and good analysis, good evidence base always attract financiers because the risks are minimized in many ways compared to those without information, which provides financier anxiety and lack of confidence. So ultimately, information makes everything better.
Thanks a lot. And just one question from my side. Are you providing some kind of capacity development training on how to use the guidance for the assessments and for developing the bankable projects or prioritizing the actions and so on? Is there some kind of training available?
Yes. In the last phase, we do this primarily just with our partner cities. It's a hand-holding exercise We develop all the technicalities with them. Right now in phase 3, as we call it, we are actually packaging this in a rather global resource that will be tailored per region and per thematic sector. And it should be ready as soon as we finish it, maybe within the year, first modules. So this will be multiple modules, definitely. I think internally our plan are more than few hundred hours of instruction. And so the first few major packages or modules will be released within the year.
Very exciting, and we hope to hear about that, and so that we can share with the larger audience also later. So thank you very much, Jesse and Leanne. And now I hand over back to Ilona.
Thanks, Andrea. And lastly, we're really pleased to hear from a city, C40 member city, and Dr. Sean O'Donoghue, who's the senior manager of the climate protection branch of the Environmental Planning and Climate Protection Department from Durban, is going to present on their resilience initiatives. So over to you, Dr. O'Donoghue.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invite today to come and present to everybody around the globe. It really is heartwarming to be able to be doing this when outside we have what looks like it might become an extreme event. And there's certainly our National Weather Service has just issued a warning for our informal settlements here on the southeast coast of Durban, where it's normally warm and lovely at this time of the winter. Because there's a warning out, we have triggered a response in one of our informal WhatsApp group networks in a project that has informal residents. Residents along the catchment provide regular updates about the level of the river, so that the residents of this informal settlement at the bottom get about 30 minutes or so to warning so that they can get their belongings out. And this has worked really well over the last couple of years that this informal network has been going. We've strengthened this approach by giving live feedback from the radar that we have in the city. And so not only are we able to say, well, don't worry this time, it's not going to be too bad, but we can also say, well, within the next 30 minutes, this big thunderstorm that we're seeing will be past. So it's quite a nice time to be able to talk to you, because at this stage, things are okay. The river's not too bad. I will give you an update as we go, because you'll probably hear my phone pinging, and that's the network working. You might also hear the wind blowing. So if there's a lot of noise, please excuse me. Please, can you advance the slide? And my presentation will give you a sort of a case study of what we've been hearing up to now. And we have in Durban, it's a typical sort of developing economy situation, although in South Africa we have a very high AIDS burden, and it's all been but forgotten since coronavirus, but we still have this situation. We have a development backlog, and all of these together, please advance the slide, make climate change just one more problem we've got to deal with. Can you advance the slide, please? So it's a wicked mix of problems, and that is pretty typical for many global villages or towns or cities that are developing. Next slide, please. Our predictions, changes that we're expecting: unseasonable weather events, changes, extreme weather events, changes in seasonality, sea level rise. We're a coastal town, coastal city, and Africa is likely to get twice the global average of temperature increase. Next slide, please. That slide just shows the number of informal settlements that are now at risk because they're in the flood line. And that one that I referred to just now, the Quarry Road West settlement, is exactly a case in point there. Next slide, please. So what do we do about it? Well, since 2015, we've had an integrated mitigation and adaptation climate change strategy called the Durban Climate Change Strategy. And then in about 2016, 2017, we started working with C40 to develop our climate action plan, which was launched in 2019. We're very fortunate that our mayor is the vice chair representing Africa. So we've had real high level support for this strategy, which has really helped our work a lot. but we've also had a lot of administrative support as well. So the good thing about this climate action plan is it's really helped us hone in our ambition to be consistent with a world that's 1.5 degrees warming, no more than that, and increase the ambition for adaptation as well. My job in the city is I lead the adaptation component of the climate change strategy. Next slide, please. In our CAP, we have a number of medium-term and long-term goals. I've just put a couple up here just for illustrative purposes. You'll see there's the one that transformed 3,600 kilometers of riverine areas, and that's precisely what Jesse was telling us about just now, the Transformative River Management Program. And the second half of my presentation will deal a lot with that as well. So that's the midterm goal. If you look at the next slide, please, you'll see the longer term goals. So in the longer term, we want to do all the rivers in the city. And if you could put the next slide on, I'll tell you how we're going to implement it. So we have the CAP, we have the Durban Climate Change Strategy. It was due for its first 5-year review. So we've gone through that process at the moment, and we've combined these two into a much bigger document that has enabling themes to allow us to do the action, and then actual implementation themes. Next slide, please. And the way we are going to implement it, don't be scared by the slide. It's in 3 pillars. There's a governance theme that we have in the city, and that rests on a very senior technical administrative team called the Technical Task Team. These are very senior administrative leaders in the city that are driving the decisions around implementing climate change, and they report directly to our mayor and his climate change committee. So it's a really strong governance base that we're working from. The middle column is the implementation of the strategy, and the right-hand column is how we continually renew the strategy, and below that is the research that we do to support our knowledge basis for decision-making and reporting on international platforms like the CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project. So I think that's all I'm going to say about the background of the work in the city. And I think the next slide you'll see is probably what I want to focus on for the majority of the time I have left. And that's the basis of our work. We have a very wide open space system in the city. It's 96,000 hectares of natural ecosystems, and it supports very high levels of biodiversity in our region. And it's impossible for the city to manage all of that, but we've started a process where we use communities, particularly poor communities living within those ecosystems, to manage it. And we call it community ecosystem-based adaptation. And we coined that phrase when we hosted COP17 in 2011. One example is where communities grow seedlings into indigenous trees for our indigenous forest on our landfill sites. So you can go to this landfill sites, and it's a very, very pleasant place. And it helps because it provides adaptation benefits like reducing flooding for community members living near there, and they get work as well, so they get an income as well. So it addresses poverty as well. And that's the basis for these type of projects, is that they are replicable. You can scale them up. There's multiple co-benefits. There's adaptation, there's mitigation because it's trapping carbon, and that's why we are really promoting this type of work. Next slide, please. A really good example of this type of work is the transformative river management that Jesse told you about earlier. And thanks, Jesse, you've made my job much easier because I can really focus on the more important parts of this presentation now. Just to, obviously, the water is the source of life, and we have a lot of communities that are still relying on clean water in rivers and reliable waters for their sort of livelihoods, but also protection from water for climate change adaptation. The next slide, please, is the project that this work was based on. So our city's finance facility work that we've done over the last 2 years was based on the Sihlanzi and Velo project. It means we are cleaning our environment. And the sort of thinking is that cooperatives manage 5-kilometer stretches of streams, taking out solid waste and alien invasive plants restoring the natural functioning of rivers, making sure the river runs so there's not vector buildups, clearing access to discharging sewer lines. It's a big one because otherwise they discharge for over a year in some cases, and various other sort of tasks. And we thought that, you know, in the early days, this project's been going for 10 years. One of our chief engineers has always approached us and said, well, there must be so many benefits that make this project worth doing from a cost benefit analysis. And we always wanted to do that. And to C40's credit, they accepted our proposal as an adaptation project to do this. Next slide, please. And that's where we came through the city's finance facility to develop a business case. You might just want to just click one or two as we go through now. So next slide, please. So this is what we emerged with, a transformative river management program, bringing in the issues of transformative adaptation into our management of our Sihlanzi program. And so that it talks about efficient municipal service delivery, cost effective. It takes climate change impacts into account. So we had a question earlier about whether it was an economic basis. Well, it is, because we know that with the climate change projections we have, we can assess what the costs are likely to be. Now, this business case was only built on the data of our culverts. It doesn't look at roads, it doesn't look at bridges, it doesn't look at any municipal infrastructure or any of the other infrastructure that privately owned in the city. And so all the numbers you see here are based on a very small set of costs, and that makes it a very conservative estimate. It also brings in social, economic, and ecological benefits as well, as as the question alluded to. And the next next slide, please. And importantly, it brings in the green and circular economies, and I'll get to it. So if you remember, the Sihlanzi project I talked about was talking about just this project, not the transformative river management program. And the next slide, please. The return on investment there, go again, please, is what, R2.60 for every R1 spent. And you can sort of divide that by 15 approximately to get US dollars. So it would cost us 92 million Rand annually for Sihlanzi program on all municipal owned land. And there would be 59 million Rands in avoided damages, 177 million Rands of societal benefits, over 1,500 jobs created. And because South Africa has such a high unemployment rate, that's a very, very palatable statistic for our politicians. And the green economy. Now, an example of the green economy is we can take that dirty plastic out of our rivers, and we are producing these paving stones, these from that plastic, and they can be a source of entrepreneurship for people as we train them up. So these are the sort of the linked sort of benefits that we're seeing from it. That's just Sihlanzi. The next slide, please, is the Transformative River Management Program. If you can click again, please. And here we're seeing a more of a range depending on where the land is, who owns it, etc. Next slide, please. So 7.5 billion Rands investment unlocks 1.9 billion damages. Remember, that's a very, very conservative figure. But also 12 to 24 billion in societal benefits, over 9,000 jobs, and the green economy initiatives that I talked about earlier. So you can see there's a really strong case in this business case here being put forward. Next slide, please. So what are we going to, these are the key messages that have come out of this business case. There's a strong case for investment, and it's a very wide-ranging range of benefits. So it's a real holistic sort of approach, taking in the circular economy as well. We're going to have to do a phased approach to implementation, and I'll touch on that after the next slide, please. And it will require lots of co-investment. Just some other outputs from this city's finance facility was we developed climate change courses during this process, and they are now being implemented in the cities to build capacity, and they're registered for sort of capacity building, etc., etc. A very nice component was we've worked with our surrounding municipalities, which we had an existing climate change compact partnership with, and they've developed their own concept notes, and we're working with our provincial government to implement. Mombasa, who we've had another sort of project with, is already implementing their own transformative river management program, and Harare, through another project, is doing the same thing. So we're seeing that, you know, this is not just about Durban, it's about sharing the knowledge and getting others to do the same thing. I think I'll use got 1 minute left, so the next slide will be my last slide, just touching on research now. You know, all this knowledge, we've got a lot from the business case, but there's so many other questions that have arisen, and we're using our research partnership, particularly our students, in an educational partnerships for innovation community model that came out of America to answer these questions. And we're finding that we're having a lot of the different type climate change related projects in the city working together, and that's been a big win for us. This engaging with the city's finance facility has helped us bring a lot of this together, and it all sits within the climate action plan and the implementation of the Durban climate change strategy. So that informal settlement project I talked about earlier is a climate change project. This transformative river management is a climate change project, and the DRAP is a climate change project as well. And that's where I'll leave it at for now. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Sean. Very, very inspiring, the example that you have just shared with all of us. I have a few questions. Firstly, I mean, just looking at the work that you've been doing for the city has been doing for for example, ecosystem reforestation, fire management, and then looking at the water, the environmental health, the sewage. So what it brings to mind is that this is very much interdepartmental. So it's trying to coordinate the work of different departments within the city, but perhaps also some of these elements might be involved with the private sector or with the national government entities, public sector or something. So what comes to mind is, you know, the coordination. So how were you able to coordinate this multi-sectoral, intersectoral activity, and you know, what were some of the challenges you faced and how were they overcome?
Sorry, I'd lost sound there for a few minutes. Could you repeat that question?
So talking about the intersectoral, interdepartmental approach, like Durban was looking at the ecosystem, the reforestation, the water, the environmental health, the sewage, everything. So it's all different departments within the city, but also probably some interaction with private sector, maybe utilities or others, and national government entities. So this requires a lot of coordination, and coordination. This interdepartmental coordination is an intersectoral coordination, something which many cities are struggling with. So any insights on that? You know, how you were able to achieve that, and you know, some tips or whatever.
Yes, we have one particularly one relevant to Durban. You know, the climate change work in Durban was started in the beginning of the 2000s by my boss, Deborah Roberts. And she went through a process of making sure that everybody knew what climate change was. And there were key officials that showed some interest that she took around to international events back when we used to still go overseas on flights to international events, and built up a stock of champions across different line functions in the city. That core of municipal officials, there was probably about a dozen of them by about 2011, 2012. They have formed the core of the interdepartmental group that works together. So that's the subcommittee, and having that core of people has helped us drive the climate change strategy and get their heads of units to form the technical task team. So it was very much a ground up driven process. Aligned with that process, whenever we get a new mayor, and we know that mayors change from time to time, and that's a risk, we always start with going to the mayor and say, listen, this is important, the climate change. And luckily, climate change is a big issue now. It's no longer, do we believe in climate change? It's what are we going to do about it? And in Africa, our climate change message that we're putting to our political leaders is one about climate change adaptation primarily. And because we're able to link adaptation with job creation and making people safer, it's an easy win for us. And we get the support of our mayors. And that has helped us with our last 3 mayors. The last 2 mayors have been C40 regional chairs. And the mayor before that was the vice president of ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. And having mayors taking that level of responsibility gives us the top-down support as well as the bottom-up. And I think that has been a big win for us. We've also spent a lot of time reaching out to our neighboring cities. So since 2014, we've been in a climate change compact partnership with our surrounding municipalities. And that's a model that also came out of the States. And we work very closely to share each other's, share learning, support each other in developing strategies and that sort of stuff. They, as I said, they're working on their own transformative river management program now. Excuse me. And having that body together, we've been able to canvass the mayors to form our own climate change council for the compact. And that's been taken up by province. So it's helped us strengthen our links with provincial government and national government as well. Having the business case, there's a particular entity in the city, the entity that's doing the paving stones, as well as gas to energy, biomass to energy, called the Durban Green Corridor, and they've been very successful working with big property owners in one catchment called the Ohlanga catchment. And to their credit, they've seen this transformative river management process. They live at the bottom of the catchment, but they can see at the top of the catchment, there's very bad degradation. There's a lot of informal settlement or poorly managed settlements. And they are investing up in the top of the catchment to improve conditions down in the catchment. And that's a really good case study. And we can share these examples with everyone here today. And that's been our case. Also, Jesse touched on the insurance, from the insurance side. We have a business case now. We have a very encouraging business case, but that's all it is at this stage. It's a business case. Thankfully, C40 have extended their support for this year to help us get our ducks in a row in the city. So turn this group of champions into an institutionalized framework that we can prioritize funding, city funding to implement city-owned implementation, and then work with the insurers and work with private sectors like the Green Corridor people to coordinate all of that. And that coordination is very, very difficult, as we heard. And it really needs dedicated bums on seats, people that are knocking on doors. It needs the top-down support. It needs the champions. It needs communities being aware of what you're doing. So it needs good communication. And we're in that process now. So hopefully in a year's time, we'll have it formally established, whether that's an entity in the city or whether that's just department, like a committee or something. We're not quite sure at this stage, but we're underway.
Thank you very much. That's a very, very comprehensive answer, and I think it would it would help a lot of cities because everyone is dealing with these issues. Thanks. There's another question about which financial instruments you plan to use to fund these programs. Is it green bonds or other municipal bonds or what? So something on that.
Yes. So there's a few different levels here, and part of there's about 3,000 kilometers or so that are city-owned. We can spend money on city-owned land. Our Municipal Finance Act says we can't spend money on land we don't own. So we will, our Chief Financial Officer loves this project, and we're looking to commit that level of spending for the city-owned land. Beyond that, our needs are, we are going to need an initial tranche of funding that can do the initial big cleanup, the first wave of action. And then after that, we can fill in as a city with green economy type projects, with maintenance and that sort of stuff. So the support that C40 are giving us for the rest of this year is firstly to help us get our ducks in a row, but then also to seek this funding. We still need to go through a process of deepening the implementation plans. We put in a funding application to Ccra, it's Cities and Climate Change in Africa program through the French Development Agency, and we're working with them to help us develop these more fine-scale implementation plans. And then we will look to big funding donors like the GCF and organizations like that.
Thank you. Again, a couple of questions. One is could you discuss a little bit how community participation was utilized in and mobilized in this transformation? And then the second one was, you have very good climate projections you showed in the slides for 2100, for example. So who helped you in developing those? I mean, was it universities or local researchers, or how were you? Because this is again something that cities struggle with, how to get good projections of the climate impact in the future on the city.
Yeah, no, thanks. And I feel another comprehensive answer coming up there. So originally our original climate change vulnerability assessment was done in 2004 using an external consultant, and that set us on our pathway. More recently, through the Climate Action Plan, the Deadline 2020 process, C40 helped us update those projections. Then through the city's finance facility, we used local sort of academic experts, once again supported by our city's finance facility. And that was particularly around the flooding and that sort of those stuff to guide the business case. In our city, I mentioned this EPIC program that we have, and the EPIC is a model that uses students that are doing existing coursework, setting research questions for their courses that they answer, and this provides information for us. I'll give you a couple of examples of projects that we are sort of planning to run this year. One is around how to generate energy from ocean currents. We have this massive western boundary current of our coastline, and students can simply do a desktop exercise looking at what the dangers are for the environment, what are the costs, the cost per meter of cable, what are the sort of the benefits, you know, all that kind of stuff. And it's quite a simple project that could help us a hell of a lot in the city make a decision on whether we proceed to doing a full feasibility study or not. Another project is around health. Are we prepared for climate change impacts in our health sector and in our clinics? And once again, students can very easily go and do surveys. And I know there's some pitfalls, there's some sensitivities, but it's something that students can do. We have a program, an EPIC program on the Transformative River Management program at the moment, looking at wastewater from being able to be used in gardens, looking at sustainable urban drainage systems. We've got some great results. All of this helping the city make decisions. So, you know, this EPIC model is very easy to implement. It doesn't cost a lot. You just need to be able to coordinate. You need someone from the city and someone from the university knocking on doors and linking disciplines with corresponding city line functions. The city asks the questions, the university students provide the answers, and collectively this body of knowledge really helps decision making. And we're really sort of getting behind this EPIC approach, and we've started an EPIC Africa network with some colleagues. Charles Denui, that's on the call, he's been a part of this discussion with us, and we're trying to spread this model because it's cost effective, it's led by innovation and students, and we think it's really appropriate for Africa. So I forgot your first part of your question.
The other part was about the community engagement, mobilization of community.
Yeah, no, thanks. And so there's different levels here again. So with the Sihlanzi approach, that's very much a bottom-up approach, working with ward councillors, going directly to communities and getting them used to this idea. This is a different sort of approach to, you know, traditional stream management in the city. You know, we have a lot of problems with our rivers in the city. There's a lot of pollution, and there are a lot of problems in terms of erosion and stuff like that. We're seeing off their own bat, many communities are doing this kind of work. And so it was quite easy getting people on board. Very difficult to coordinate, 355 or so kilometers of stream that's been done up to now. It takes a lot of coordination, but the model that was used was using cooperatives. We have some peer review papers, that shows where the pitfalls have been and where the benefits are. For the city's finance facility, we used a more formal approach through stakeholding webinars and stuff like that, getting feedback, regular feedbacks, getting people to sort of provide us with information. And then there was another research project, the MCR2030 research project, which looked at the various community stream cleaning projects in the city, and the leaders of those projects were providing the information that helped us generate this concept of transformative river management program, bringing in issues of transformative adaptation into the program, and that's how we ended up with it. So different sectors contributed to this process.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sean. This was really, really, again, I have to say, very inspiring example, and we hope to hear from you some other time also again. I think some of the participants have written also, will there be more, webinars on risk assessments and so on. So I think people are looking forward to a deeper dive maybe. So maybe this is something that we could think of in the future to have another one with more in-depth discussions. So with this, I would like to thank C40 for making this happen and being, it was really, really powerful to take this to more than 240 participants today. And thank all the participants. But before we close, I'd like to hand over to Ilona.
Thank you, Sanjaya. And I just want to, as C40 is a knowledge partner of this MCR initiative, we, on behalf of myself, my colleagues, thank our UNDRR colleagues for coordinating and running this webinar. And just thank you for providing an opportunity for us to showcase a bit of what we offer our member cities and the knowledge and lessons learned that we can share with non-member cities as well. And to everyone that's joined, we really do hope that what we've shared here today will help you along your resilience journeys. And I just want to say thank you to my C40 colleagues and Dr. O'Donoghue for taking the time to participate in this. Thank you all. Thank you, Sanjaya and Wajirika.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ilona, and thank you so much all of the speakers. It was very inspiring. I think it's a very good initial steps that we can continue to strengthen collaboration and bring more of the knowledge and your insights into sharing with the cities who are also joining the MCR 2030. We really look forward to that. And the presentation and the recording will be later shared with you all via the emails that we'll be sending automatically from Zoom, and will be posted on the webpage about this event. And we will continue to deliver this similar interesting webinars as part of the MCR 2030 in the next months to come. And the lineup next is the beginning of July, that we'll have our colleagues from our cities, the Resident City Network, being sharing a lot of the tools and also the insight from their engagement with the cities as well. So stay tuned for more information to come, and I hope you also have the rest of the day pleasantly. And reconvene with you again in the future. Thank you very much.